Hello, everyone. This is Sean from the Soccernostalgia blog. I have the pleasure to interview Mr. Runar Nordvik. Mr. Nordvik is the head of media at Norwegian club FK Haugesund and a former football journalist. This interview is separate from a podcast series. This video interview will serve as a companion piece to a written blog presentation on the Norway versus England World Cup Qualifier on June the 2nd, 1993, looked upon from a Norwegian perspective. Mr. Nordvik was interviewed previously regarding Norway's historic 1981 World Cup qualifying win over England, as well as the 1987 European Championship qualifier against France. Hello, Mr. Nordvik. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's go back in time. Can you describe the state of the affairs in Norwegian football by June 1993?
In the middle of 1993, things had changed to a very large extent compared to what Norwegian national team football was used to. Because through the 60s, 70s, 80s, I think more or less everyone has concealed to the fact that Norway was never going to make it to a major tournament, never going to be one of the better football nations in Europe. But at this point, things had changed, and suddenly Norway was full of confidence going into any kind of match at this point, because we had spent the last 2 or 3 years prior to 1993 defeating everyone. Didn't matter who was on the opposite side. We had started getting results, and at this point we were top of our group in the World Cup qualifiers, and should be mentioned that when the draw was made and we ended up with England, Poland, Holland, and Turkey, with as well as San Marino, everyone was of course more or less gobsmacked or shocked by the opponents. But very soon we started to realize that we actually had a chance of making a major tournament for the first time in 60 years, despite the massive opposition we were up against. So at this point in 1993, there was a very strong belief in the Norwegian national team, which was extremely unusual.
And of course, the man responsible for all this was the national team manager, Egil Olsen. What had been his impact since taking over in 1990?
Oh, we could talk about this for hours, but I think it's very hard to explain to anyone who didn't witness it and experience it, how much of an impact one person can have. Because when he took charge of Norway in 1990, we were, as I said, one of the minnows in Europe. We very seldom celebrated any major victories, and as far as qualifying for major tournaments, it was nothing that anyone actually firmly believed at that point. But he came in. Ingvar Stadheim had resigned at the start of the qualification campaign for the Euros in 1992 after a couple of matches. And Egil Drillo Olsen, who was at that point the under-21 coach for Norway, he was given the temporarily responsibility. He was given the task to just take us through the campaign or something like that. So a very short-term solution was supposed to be. But overnight, I remember his first game in charge. It was against Cameroon, who had just participated in the World Cup, reaching the quarterfinals, almost reaching the semifinals. And we beat them 6-0 in Egil Drillo Olsen's first match. And since then, everything went straight upward. And the impact of Egil Drillo Olsen in terms of Norwegian national team football is beyond belief. It's a fairy tale story. He was considered a madman, but he was a very shrewd thinker. So he knew exactly what he was doing whenever he faced any kind of opponent. He didn't bother. It was never concerned about the quality of the opposing team. It was all about how Norway was supposed to play, because he knew that if the Norwegian team played his kind of football to their full extent, anyone would get in trouble. And it happened game after game after game. So he turned things around 180 degrees or 360 degrees. And we went from being one of the poorest national teams in Europe to one of the best, simply by results. And I think his track record, when you sum up his 8 years in charge, for the first time he was the national head team coach, I think he played more or less 90 matches and he lost only 11 of them. And it was an insane period in Norwegian football with him in charge. Simple as that.
Ahead of this match in June, in the previous fall, in October, Norway had actually earned a draw at Wembley against England. As a result of this, do you think they were much more confident ahead of this match in June at home?
We were very confident. As I remember, I was pretty certain that we was going to win this match because we had defeated more or less everyone on home soil. So I was pretty sure that England wasn't gonna be an exception. Should be mentioned that when we drew, England won at Wembley 6 months earlier or something like that. It was a very fortunate result. We had all the luck. We had one shot on goal, which was a marvelous goal from Rekdal, who scored a cracking goal from distance. But I think it was more or less the only chance we produced in that game. And we were completely outplayed by England in that actual game. So I don't think that actual game built a confidence or a belief that we were going to beat England. But all the other matches we played in this period prior to this game made people strongly believe that we're going to beat England this time as well as we did back in 1981.
So let's describe the backbone of the Norwegian team at this point. There are some familiar faces: Erik Thorsvedt in goal, Werder Bremen standout, and a Norway captain Rune Bratseth, and others who would make their way in the English Premier League in the following years.
This is a very interesting mix of players because I think we can fairly say that this was not individually the best players in Europe. But when they got together as a team, they turned out to be more or less unbeatable. No one managed to beat this team for many, many, many years, except for on a very few occasions. And it wasn't due to the individual quality of each player, but it was they fitted in to Egil Drillo Olsen's system, and this team would make out the backbone of the team for the next decade or something like that. There would be some minor changes, of course, but this would take the Norwegian team into the next 10 years of international football. And it's a very interesting mix of players because you have one of the goal scorers, Øyvind Leonardsen. He was later going to England, having a very good career, but he was a very limited kind of player. And he had a nickname that he was best without ball. That was his biggest fortune in football. He was a running machine. He kept going, had an incredible pace, and kept running for 90 minutes, and was a very vital player in this team, although very technically limited, but he was a working horse. And then you had, of course, Jostein Flo, almost 2 meter, extreme physics, very vital in Egil Drillo Olsen's game plan, was supposed to win every kind of duel up front. In the midfield, you had 2 very technical players. Lars Bohin, the other goal scorer. He wasn't a typical Norwegian player because he was quite skillful, probably more suited to the Italian football and that kind of stuff at the time. But he had found his role in this team as well, together with another very technically gifted player, probably the most technically gifted player Norway has ever had, at least prior to Martin Ødegaard, Erik Mykland. So it was a very interesting mix of players. Yeah, each and every one of them had some very extreme skills and in certain areas. And when they got glued together, they turned out to be a very, very hard team to beat. But also a quality team in terms of they scored a lot of goals. And I think we went through the entire qualification letting in 5 goals or something like that. It was completely insane when you look at the opponents.
Ahead of this match, how important was the impact of the England-based players? We mentioned earlier Eric Thorsvedt was the goalkeeper of Tottenham. In defense, you had Gunnar Hall from Oldham, Bjørneby at Liverpool, and even on the bench, you have Kare Ingebrigtsen, who was playing at Manchester City. And of course, others would follow.
I think the two key players would be Erik Thorstvedt and Rune Bratseth, without a doubt. They were the sort of central line, starting with them, and then you could build from there in terms of other players. And it should be mentioned that the players mentioned, they didn't have that at that point. They didn't have made any real impact at their English clubs. Kåre Ingebrigtsen very hardly played for Manchester City. I think Stig Inge Bjørneby, he was hardly getting a place in the squad at Liverpool, so he went back to Brøndby in Denmark on loan, and will return to England and have a great career. But at this point, he wasn't very influential. Gunnar Halle was a very steady performer at Oldham. But I would say that at this point, the English-based players weren't probably the most influential ones in the national team. Should be mentioned that one of the players was missing, Henning Berg. He was playing at Blackburn at the time. He wasn't part of the national team for this match. I don't remember why, probably injured or something like that. But he was, at this point, he was the first choice at fullback in Blackburn, a very key player for Kenny Dalglish. So I think this match actually triggered a steady stream of Norwegian players going to England after this match, because shortly after, a year or two after, there were more or less 30 Norwegian players playing in top level in England.
Let's discuss and summarize the status of this World Cup qualifying group ahead of this match. And Norway just started on fire in this group.
Yeah, we started off with a 10-0 win against San Marino. That was not such a huge result, but us defeating San Marino was no surprise. But it got us off to a very good start, and it just built further on results that we had gained in the prior qualification. We didn't qualify for the Euros in 1992 because that ship had sailed prior to Egil Olsen taking charge, but he almost got us there. So starting off with a convincing win against San Marino was exactly what we needed. And then we went on to defeat the Netherlands at home in our second qualifying game. So after
that was probably the reference match as far as building up the confidence.
Absolutely. And after that, they never looked back. And it's a story which sort of illustrates the way of thinking Egil Drillo Olsen represented at the time. Because 5 minutes before the players were supposed to walk out against the Dutch players, they had Ruud Gullit, they had Koeman, they had Van Basten, they had Rijkaard, they had all the best players in the world, more or less. The last thing he told his players was, remember, don't underestimate the Dutch, because he had built such a strong belief within the group that he was going to win this match if they followed his tactics. So he felt he had to make sure that they didn't go out there and underestimate the opponent. And this was the Dutch team, which was easily one of the top 3 best teams in the world at the time. So, and then we defeated them 2-1. It was just the sort of confirmation everyone needed and was looking for, to strongly believe that this time we can actually make it. And well, the further the qualification went, we got all these kind of answers. Whenever we met any team that was supposed to be better than us, we either defeated them or managed to get a draw. We got a draw at Wembley, and we would travel to Holland to the rematch and get a draw there as well. Another very fortunate result, should be said, because
in fact, it was a week after this match, in fact.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
It felt like we were simply incapable of losing football matches, no matter who we met at the time. So going into this match, the qualification had started off well. We were top of the group. We hardly let in any goals. We scored a lot of goals. Everything was flowing. We didn't have any major injuries. England was starting to lagging behind. They had dropped some points already. and they were chasing us and not the other way around. And I think everyone knew that going into this game, if we beat England in this game, they will not be able to catch up on us. So I think it came from Poland, managing a draw or something like that, which wasn't a very good result for them.
And in April, they drew at home at Wembley against the Netherlands.
Yes.
And so, in a way, both Netherlands and England were struggling in the early going, and they kind of canceled each other out, such that Norway was able to lead this group.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up in a very good way. Well, as I said, this game would be very decisive for the English team if they would lose, and they knew that. So I think they felt the pressure. Their head coach, Graham Taylor, the players, anyone involved with the English team knew that this was more or less make or break.
Let's also mention that Norway also defeated San Marino 2-0 in the return fixture, and maybe a week before the England game in October. By the time in April, when they defeated Turkey at home 3-1, Norway looked like they were set to qualify. And this match would confirm this.
Yeah.
Now, was the media making any references and comparisons to the historic 1981 match in the lead up to this match?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Norway facing England, doesn't matter who's the reigning World Cup champion or who's considered the best team in the world. Whenever Norway faces England, that's the biggest opponent we can face due to relations over many, many years where Norway has always been very focused on England and English football. And so facing England is the biggest match, no matter what, and no matter how good the English team might be. So, and at this point, we hadn't played England that very often. We had played them back in the early 80s, and we had faced them once at Wembley, as already mentioned. But this was, I think it was this only the second time or something like that we had played them at home. So there was a huge fuss, and of course, a lot of parallels drawn back to the historical win in 1981. So at this point, I would say that this was the second biggest match on Norwegian soil at the time, only beaten by the game back in 81.
Can you paint a picture of the atmosphere in Norway ahead of this match?
As far as I remember it, everyone was, as I already mentioned, full of confidence, which is, of course, is completely insane to think that people were quite certain that we're going to defeat this English team. It was a very good English team. They had more or less all of their major players. And this was the first time that Norwegian supporters felt that they were in for a very, very, very good chance of qualifying for a major tournament. So fuss surrounding this team and Egil Olsen and the entire nation was on their toes, well, more or less 24/7, 365 days, the entire year regarding this national team, because people couldn't get enough of them. So, and they just went from strength to strength and won matches. And well, it was, I would say that it was the closest thing you'll ever come to euphoria in Norway, because, well, whenever we had won matches, people were celebrating like we had won the World Cup. And it was a period of time that I don't think we'll never see again in Norwegian football, because this was the first time, and there's always very special when you do it, when it's a brand new experience for people.
Where were you in life at this point, and how did you experience this match?
I had just left the Norwegian army. I had spent 1 year in the Norwegian forces. I had left only a few days prior to this match, so I had moved back home with my parents, or my father. I remember watching this game in the living room where I was living at the time, and it was summer, and everyone was, as I said, there was sort of excitement within the population, which I never experienced before and probably never will experience again. So this was overwhelmingly the most important thing that happened during the summer. these kind of matches, and playing England at home in June. Well, everyone, this was prior to mobile phones and the internet and everything, so everyone watched the television, everyone, or you went, of course, if you were fortunate to get tickets to the game. And it was the only thing that people were concerned with at the time, and I was no exception.
So let's take a look at this match on June the 2nd at Oslo at Ullevål Stadion. The referee was the Hungarian Sandor Pool, who would referee next year's World Cup final between Brazil and Italy. For Norway, we have Erik Thorsvedt of Tottenham in goal, Gunnar Hall of Oldham Athletic, Tor Pedersen of Brann, captain of the team Rune Bratseth of Werder Bremen in Germany. In fact, he won the Bundesliga title that season.
Yeah.
And he would be replaced by Roger Nilsson of Viking in the 82nd minute, Viking Stavanger. Then we have Stig Ing Bjørneby of Liverpool, Jostein Flo of Sogndal, Erik Mikland of Start, Øyvind Leonhardsen of Rosenborg, Jan Age Fjørtoft of Rapid Wien in Austria. He'd replaced by Goran Sorloth of Rosenborg in the 57th minute, Kjetil Rekdal of Liers in Belgium, and Lars Bohinen of Lillestrøm. And on the bench, we have Einar Rosbach of Lyn as the backup goalkeeper, Jan Ove Pedersen of Lillestrøm, and Kare Ingebrigtsen of Manchester City. The England team, we have the following lineup. The team managed by Graham Taylor. We have Chris Woods of Sheffield Wednesday in goal, Lee Dixon of Arsenal, Tony Adams of Arsenal, Des Walker of Sampdoria in Italy. He'd replaced by Nigel Clough in the 63rd minute, Gary Pallister of Manchester United, Carlton Palmer of Sheffield Wednesday, Lee Sharp of Manchester United, captain of the team David Platt of Juventus in Italy, Paul Gascoigne of Lazio in Italy, Les Ferdinand of Queen's Park Rangers, Teddy Sheringham of Tottenham, and he'd replaced by Ian Wright of Arsenal in the 46th minute. So this match, Norway would dominate, and just before halftime, in the 42nd minute, they would take the lead. There's a quick free kick on the right side. Hal passes it to Fjørtoft, who passes across to Leonardson to score. Going into the halftime, Norway has the lead and England has their backs against the wall. Presumably their tactics in the second half would have been to score and tie the match. However, Norway killed this match early in the second half. So in the 48th minute, from the middle of the field, Mikland sends a long pass to Leonardson on the left side, and he sent Bohinen through, who shot from a narrow angle. Norway were ahead. England had no way back. Norway would go on to win. Even though there's still months of qualification matches left, this more or less sealed England's fate. And Norway were, at this point, they look like likely winners of this group after this match.
Yeah, pretty much sums it up. And of course, as I remember it, we fully deserved the win. I don't think England created any major chances during the match, and I remember them subbing off Teddy Sheringham because I don't think they had a single shot on goal.
They seemed completely disorganized in this match.
Yes, and I remember afterwards there was a lot of writing in the English papers, and this was the worst performance they had seen England performed for many years. And I think that's pretty much true, because I remember England being very poor on the day. And we were also fortunate, of course, to score these 2 goals just prior to the break and then shortly after the break. And it was the worst timing for the English team, of course, to concede goals at those 2 times. So, and when Haugesund scored that iconic goal, it has an iconic status in Norway, how we just not really sure how he does it, but he managed to get his shot from over the head of Chris Woods in England's goal from a very short distance. And, well, I think everyone just felt that this is game over. This match has been won. And I don't think England at any point looked like they were threatening anything. I think they just ran off and had conceded to the defeat 15 minutes before the end. When you mentioned all those players and that kind of stuff, I got the goosebumps back, because I remember this so vividly, how we defeated England at the time. And it was just as fun as back in 1981.
So, as I mentioned, there were still months of competition left, and this win did not mean there was automatic qualification. However, in terms of belief, it seemed like at this point that Norway had more or less qualified to the World Cup. Was that the belief?
Yes. I think what was remaining was 2 matches against Poland. We hadn't faced Poland either at home or away at this point. So we would have to go to Poland, face them, as well as play them at home. So those 2 matches was sort of tricky, because Poland is a great nation, and you can't just expect to go on and win against a nation like that. But we managed that as well. So
yeah, and we should mention that Poland at this point had no chance of qualifying anyway.
No, they were down and out. So, which was, of course, was a huge advantage for us. But later that autumn, we would defeat them at home. And after that, I think everyone was dead certain that this was done deal and we were going to the World Cup. Although mathematically, we could still be knocked out of the group stage in qualification. But I think everyone just knew that this was done and dusted.
Do you remember the celebrations afterwards by yourself and others?
Yes, I remember people in the capital. Was, of course, news desks, and everyone this was the major event. So they were present in the center of the capital, where people were celebrating with flags and taking a bath in fountains. And it was pretty much the same scenes you see whenever anyone wins the World Cup. And I also remember, for some reason, I don't know why, but all the players after the match, and they had, for some reason, started to cut their official match day suit. They had cut off their arms and most part of their legs, because they were going to the hot United States. So there's a famous picture of all these players posing for a group photo with the remains of their matchday kits. This is another iconic picture in terms of Norwegian football and Norwegian sports and, well, Norwegian history.
Yeah, well, it would also have an effect on English football history, as the direction of travel to the English League only increased after this win. And I imagine it was obvious that it was clearly after this win that the interest of the English clubs just increased after this match.
Absolutely. Straight after this match, a lot of Norwegians moved to England. Jan Åge Fjørtoft moved from Austria to England. Lars Bohinen, one of the goal scorers, he would move to Nottingham Forest. I think 1 year later, Øyvind Leonardsen would move to Wimbledon. And from 93, 94, 95, 96, those years, there was massive export of players to England.
And in fact, from this group on that day, only 4 players did not end up in England.
Yeah.
So that
as well, of course, he would also go to Sheffield United. Time Roger Nilsson would go there. So this was the key influential match. Tore Pedersen would travel to Oldham and Blackburn later on. And so this was definitely an extremely important game in terms and result in terms of opening the path to English football for Norwegian players. And it went as far as people sitting on their bench at Norwegian clubs, joining Premier League clubs at the time. That's how it worked. During those years, we had players who wasn't playing any significant part in their Norwegian teams or standing out in the Norwegian league, joining Southampton and Coventry and those kind of clubs in England, because, well, English clubs had very good experiences with Norwegian players. They were loyal and hardworking and never complained, and pretty much the same mentality as the English players. So they became hugely popular at the time.
How does this win rank in the annals of Norwegian football history?
Top three, I would think. It doesn't dethrone the win in 81 because that's the standout result. And it doesn't compare probably either to defeating Brazil in the World Cup in 1998. But besides those two results, I think this is probably the third biggest occasion and biggest win in Norwegian football ever.
To compare to the 1981 win, though, the 1981 win, at the time, it was an inconsequential match in terms of the final placings. But this one had a bearing as far as qualification. So do you still think the 1981 somehow it has a more historical significance than this one?
Yes, it does, because the win in 1981, despite not being of any major importance in terms of qualifying, was still the first time the Norwegian national team did the unthinkable. No one expected the Norwegian team to defeat England in 1981. It was completely surreal. But in 93, I think more or less everyone in Norway was convinced that we would defeat England on the day. So it doesn't rate among the 81 win. It doesn't. Nothing can probably ever compare to that. But it's still a big night in terms of Norwegian football history, and actually a day, because it was played in the afternoon. It wasn't at night, so it was played quite early in the afternoon, I think, or something like that. 81, biggest occasion, definitely. But that game aside, there's only one other fixture I can imagine can be compared to this fixture.
In closing, Norway did not build up on the 1981 win. However, this 1993 win, was this the reference point that everyone believed this Norway could achieve greater things?
It was one of 3 or 4 reference points at the time, because prior to this qualification for the World Cup, we had beaten Italy at home in the qualification for the Euro 92. That was the first one. And then you defeated Holland at the start of this qualification and qualifying campaign. So this home win against England just added to that. And after this game, there was really no one fearing anyone, because history had showed us that it didn't matter who we met. This team was capable of defeating anyone. And at some point, shortly after this, in 95 or something like that, we were second placed on the FIFA ranking with a team that, as I already said, if you look at the individual players, none of them were even close to being among the best players in Europe. But when they got together as a team and had this madman as a head coach, they felt invincible. I remember players speaking afterwards that whenever they went out, it didn't matter who they were standing aside in the players' tunnel prior to the match. It could be Brazilians, Argentinians, it didn't matter. They knew that most likely we will win this match if we do as Drillo has told us. So there was an extreme strong belief within the players as well that they could beat anyone, and they did.
With that, I would like to thank you for this interview. And I would urge everyone to please read the main blog article as well for more detail. The link is included on the video upload description, along with our respective contact informations. So thank you, Runar, and I hope to continue these discussions on Norway football history.
We sure will. My pleasure.
Thank you.